Yes, my name is not Mark Johnson, and it's great to be with you. Some of you got to meet my wife last night, and many of you are now unhappy that she's the one who flew home, and I'm the one who's stayed here. But I'm very happy to be here because I first met James, I guess, about a year ago. We figured this out, wasn't it? A year ago in Maidenhead.
In Maidenhead.
Yes.
The centre of the universe, where Theresa May
That's right.
is the MP, isn't she?
Right.
Yeah.
And Lord Buckethead also ran for that seat, if you remember, the joke
didn't
candidate
remember that.
for Maidenhead.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers that. I remember
No,
that, yeah.
no.
And I remember last year, we were having a conversation, it must have been around the same time, because you were just about to row, it wasn't the full length of the Thames, but row some length of the Thames?
Yeah, it was pretty much the full length of the River Thames. It was from a place called Lechlade, which is the start of the navigable Thames, to Teddington, and which is before the Thames turns tidal. And I think we were strongly advised not to take our little boat on the tidal Thames, and that might have been the end of us.
Wow. So
But
you survived?
We did it.
Yes?
We did it. 128 miles, 43 locks,
Wow.
but did it.
You did it.
Yeah.
And then this year,
Yeah.
you've done something kind of equally mad. What was this year's mad
well, it's
idea?
really, I mean, it's recognizing that I now have, lots and lots of disabilities, which I'll talk about in a second, but I've just finished last week, literally on Friday, a 230-mile tandem ride, sitting on the back of a tandem, which you are totally powerless. I don't know whether any of you folks have ever done it, but you've really got to trust your pilot, as they call it. And if you don't, you actually won't last long. So
You realise you're meant to pedal as well, aren't
well,
you?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Okay,
I
good,
did
good.
pedal. I promise.
Very good. So you had 5 different
Yeah.
partners, and they were
Well,
on the
I
front.
had 2 partners every day, so I did
Okay.
50 miles a day, 30 in the morning, 20 in the afternoon, and then on the last day it was my wife, and she was asked to do 30 miles.
in a bicycle built for 2.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
And that was to raise money for.
For what I do now,
Yeah.
which is I can and I am.
Tell us what I can and I am is.
Yeah. Well, I can and I am is what I do. My passion is seeing young people, all people really, but young people, having been a teacher, really believing in themselves, who they are and what they can do. I sometimes feel that the school system is very good at telling you what you can't do. It's very good at saying, well, you're not good at physics, you're not good at French, your sport's not great, drama, music and art, well, what have you got to hang your hat on? Nothing. But I believe that God doesn't put anyone on earth as a sort of a second-rate candidate. Everybody's got something somewhere. And so my passion is really trying to encourage school staff to be what I would call pastorally proactive, for parents to understand that actually the journey through adolescence, we need to be looking for things that our kids can really do. And for kids to realize that they all can really do something. So I speak a lot in schools, and as well as that, I mentor kids one-to-one. And the last thing that we do is we bake bread. A great friend of mine and I, on Wednesday mornings when I'm around and I'm not out and about, we bake bread with local community, people from the local community who, we call it knockback, which is this idea that when, before you put bread into the oven for its final rise, it's you knock it back. And it's this idea that actually often, people that have been knocked back in life, let's share stories, because this friend of mine has really had his woes as well. And we share our stories and we try to restore hope. I think hope is the key word for all of us, actually. I really do.
And I think that's been a constant throughout your journey. So before you got so ill,
Yeah.
You loved kids. You've been in teaching for how long?
That's right. I was a teacher. I was a teacher for 16 years, and 9 of those years I was one of those people that used to run a boarding house. So it was a boarding school. It was a real sort of 24/7 type job. So I was pastorally in charge of 60-odd teenage boys. And that's really was the thing that drove me. I taught geography A-level, but that was almost a means to an end. And the thing that really, really drove me was this, I want to make a human being the person they're meant to be. That was always the big driver. So I was a teacher for 16 years. I'm married. We have 4 children. And should I keep going?
Well, so you were very much on that journey. So posh school with, yeah.
Posh school, but we're not going to judge it. It was, yes, it was a fee-paying school on the edge of Bath, all was good. And I was coming to the end of my sort of house mastering days, my tenure. After having done it for 9 years, I was beginning to sort of get a bit tired of it. Mm-hmm. And people kept on saying to me, I think you would be a great head teacher. And I wasn't too sure about that. But in the end, I sort of thought, well, I've got 4 kids in the school. There are real perks to the job. There's great opportunity to influence as well. And so I applied for a headship, for the headship of the prep school, which is the up to 13 bit of the school that I was teaching in. And a surprise to me, I think a surprise to many actually, I got the job. Mm-hmm. And that was a great moment, folks, and that was very much where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing at that time. As a 39-year-old, we're going to be living in a lovely home, beautiful views, our children's education was all set fair, and everything was as it should be. And, my wife was happy because the shopping in Bath is very good. So all was good, and that was where I was.
Yeah, a kind of a dream. And then as part of moving into this role, they said you have to do a medical.
That's right.
And what happened then?
Well, a medical, I don't know how many of you folks have had medicals or what you even understand of a medical. I thought that it was really the sort of preserve of being Cristiano Ronaldo or something like that. I thought, wow, gosh, I'm a sporting legend now as well. So I bounced off to the school doctor full of intrigue. What actually happens at a medical? He had me jumping up and down, and I was jumping up. And he wanted me to calm down, I think. And he checked my reflexes worked and checked, prodding this and checking that, and all was fine, and finished up with an eye test. The old-fashioned acuity board, as they call it, came out, and my left eye was covered over, and I went racing down it, almost to the bottom line. Bring it on, I thought. Then he covered over my right eye, and I couldn't even see the juicy, big, fat, bold A at the top. To the point that my doctor thought that I was teasing him. He said, "Oh, really, James? Can you really not? Are you joking?" And I said, "No, I can't." He said, "That basically means you're blind in your left eye. Did you not know?" And I said, I sort of knew. My right eye's working jolly well, and I'm getting a bit older, and these things happen.
2 eyes is greedy,
Who needs 2? And so no, he said, "No, you really shouldn't be blind in your left eye. So I'm gonna send you on to an optician." So the next morning I went to an optician. It was torches to the back of the eye, and it was magnifying glasses, and it was really trying to solve why couldn't I see with my left eye. And the dear lady, so sweet, she said, "James, I really can't see what the problem is, but I'm sure it's nothing too grave. But I am going to have to refer you on to the ophthalmic department at the big hospital in Bath," which is where I went the following morning. And I remember it so vividly, folks. It was a Friday morning, and on the Saturday, with our 4 children, we were due to be going on holiday to Greece, almost like a celebratory holiday with wider family and cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents, and it was a real hoolie. And, excuse my French, but my children were wetting themselves with excitement. I mean, they really were. It was nappies, it was armbands, it was everything everywhere. And my wife and I had a slightly sort of a laid-back parenting moment, I'd say. We said to a next-door neighbour, beautiful morning. Can you just keep a bit of an eye on our children? We'll be about an hour. Well, we weren't an hour. We were 8.5 hours, and we returned with the news that Daddy had a brain tumor. And I remember two things so vividly about that day. One was sitting with my wife, having had an MRI scan, waiting for the results, waiting for the consultant's door to open. And we were sitting there and we were discussing utterly frivolous things like, what time are we going to leave for Greece? Where are we going to get breakfast? What about a coffee? The door opens and this youngest Sicilian registrar walked out, and she said to me, "You are a very poorly man." And then they were waiting whether they were going to airlift me from Bristol that evening out to, from Bath out to Bristol. And then they eventually said, "No, we're not going to do that." And I went home and we had to tell the children, firstly, that they couldn't go to Greece, which I think they were more devastated about, actually. Secondly, that Daddy wasn't well and had a brain tumor. But I do remember my son, who was about 11, as his chin wobbled and he tried to hold back the tears, he said, "Dad, are you going to die? Are you going to die?" And my boy, that's a fast ball. That's a really fast ball to hear. And it was so strange, folks, because it was such a, the celebration and the congratulations cards, they were still coming in. Those red cards of well done, brilliant, on to the next step. And then bang, a really big bang.
Yeah.
Should I keep going with?
Because not only is your health now in great jeopardy.
Yeah.
But everything about your life is kind of caught up in this.
Yeah.
Because this was the medical for the job, the dream job that's attached to the house, that's attached to everything in your dreams.
Yeah.
It is all hung by a thread, and that thread's now severed.
You're severed.
How does that feel?
I was in total shock to begin with, and I just don't think I processed it. I had no idea really as to where this was going to go. I don't think I had any idea how ill I was, and how awful it was going to be. And there started what I would call the annus horribilis, which, it couldn't have got worse. And actually, I still battle with many, many different elements of it, which is nearly 6 years on. So I just had no idea what was around the corner. It was going to be an absolute bomb.
When did surgery happen?
So surgery happened about 2.5 weeks later. So on, I don't know if you remember Super Saturday at the London Olympics. I went to that. I was there. I was present. And then the next morning, I went into a hospital in Bristol called Frenchay. And there I was sort of kept. And on the Monday morning, I went in for my first operation, which was 14 hours long. And that was really trying to detach a lot of tumor that had got sort of wrapped around my brainstem. Then I came out and I spent quite a long time, a very long time, during which I had this tracheostomy. And actually I was in intensive care for 2 weeks after that first operation. That's where I celebrated my 40th birthday. Actually, it was great. And then so I had this tracheostomy, which meant that I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I couldn't talk. That's a real challenge, isn't it? To not talk, and not eat and drink. There's such foundational pleasures, but they were just taken away. Then the next operation, which was basically I had what was called an on plaque, which is thin but all over the place, and it had got itself into my optic nerves as well.
James, can you just put your mic?
Sorry, it had got itself into my optic nerves, and the second operation left me really without sight, And so you can see the white cane down there, which I tell everyone, if you want to look cool, you've got to carry a white cane. I'm not sure if anyone believes me with that, but yeah. So the second operation, I came out of hospital, a very, very weak, a very poorly man, unable to walk, unable to talk. And at that stage, I was still in the position where potentially I was going to take on a job, a headmaster job. And I was steered down to my mother's house, so out of the community that I was living in. They couldn't see me looking like that or being like that. And I went down to my mum's. And I remember so vividly, in fact, I was sharing the story the other day as I was thinking about, I've just cycled all that way. We rode all that way last year. But actually, when I came out of hospital, I couldn't walk. And a physio used to come along every morning and would try and help me walk from one side of my mother's kitchen to the other without falling over. I was very, very, very weak.
How big was the tumor?
It was big. I remember seeing my surgeon, who actually said he was that close to deeming me to be inoperable. He said, I just couldn't see any way of operating on you without leaving you paralyzed, dribbling in the corner of the room. He said, I look at you today, able to walk and talk, and I think it's a miracle. I think it's a total miracle. He said it was big, there was a lot of it, but the problem was it had got itself into one or two, as he described, very grumpy locations. So the brainstem, that's where, he was so close to saying no, because he thought, you go anywhere near that brainstem, it usually means paralysis. But it was like, as he described it, it was like chicken off a bone. It just dripped off. And I think that was the prayer of the saints. I think, people praying, actually people often say, but you're still, you can't see, you still can't run, you can't. But actually, it could have been so much worse.
I can and I am. So how's your wife Olivia kind of coping at this point?
I mean, 5 years on, she's in good shape. I was saying to Mark at supper, I was saying, it has been a real journey for us. We've had to go through real trauma. And I think my problem to begin with, if I'm honest with you, was that I went into a sort of uber denial mode. I went into, no, it's all okay, I'm alive. No, I can't see, but don't worry about that. And I didn't really go through the deep, dark grief of everything that had gone and everything that's been taken away. But I've got a fabulous wife. And she has been a real point of wisdom. And actually she has gone through, her journey of, I've lost my husband. So she's been good.
So what part does faith play in your journey? You kind of grew up in a believing household.
Yeah.
And so Jesus was always kind of on
Always
the scene.
there. Yeah,
always
he was.
there.
So
And
when
what
this
does
all
that
happened,
mean when...
when this all happened, faith was something that I professed to, was something that I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. And so, I found myself in a really very, very dark space. And, when I think of when I think back now to where I went through, I think, oh my word, was it really that bad? And it was, and I was almost inoculated against it. And I think that was, again, the prayers, and I think it was faith in God. I used to have a tradition with my senior pupils from the house after they'd done their A-levels, and before leaving the school, I would have a final one-to-one chat with them. And I remember this boy, who was a Christian guy actually, he said to me, "Sir, how have you got through this annus horribilis?" And I will say now, 5 years on, I still live by this, folks. I still absolutely live by it. And I said to him, Ben, this is going to sound weird. As a blind man, I'm going to talk to you about looking. And the first thing I said to Ben is that we've got to look up. Looking up. And faith has been so important. I remember my wife attaching a card that was at the end of my bed, and it said, God will not leave you nor forsake you. And I think in that ward, I felt totally forsaken. I was unable to eat. I was unable to drink. I was unable to talk and communicate. And I was surrounded by people that were dying. There I was, age 40, still dreaming dreams about what life would be like. And whoa, people were dying. And that was the point at which suddenly what had been something that I professed, I needed to deeply own and say, God, what is going on? How do I do this? And it wasn't a deep anger and a why. I almost didn't have time for that. It was, God, how do I do this? This is just too awful for words. I remember sometimes, the nurses would come around and you'd have your bed bath and being treated like you were a pub floor. And you were just, that was, really hammered home that sense of forsakenness. So look up. And I used to, the verse from Psalm 121, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? Well, it comes from God, the maker of heaven and earth. The second thing I said to Ben is that we must keep looking forward. I think that our hopes, our possibilities, our opportunities, they're tomorrow. Yesterday's happened. The past has happened. It's been, it's gone. There might have been good bits, there might have been bad bits. The milk's being spilt. But actually keep looking forward. I think the past is a great teacher, but it's the wrong master. And actually, if we reflect on it, we can refine ourselves and move on. But if we ruminate on it, we often define ourselves. Well, I'm the useless blind man. It's all over now. But keep looking forward. And that's where the hopes are. Again, there's a wonderful, wonderful verse in the book of Hebrews, which talks about hope being an anchor to the soul. It's actually something that holds us down. Otherwise, I think we're prone to go up and down, like we're on a roller coaster or something. And then the third thing I said to Ben is the importance of looking out. And I shared that, that actually sometimes, and this is so true today, that actually waking up is almost the hardest thing I do every day. Because I might wake up and I'm playing cricket with my boys in the garden or something. And in my dreams. And I wake up and I open my eyes and think, this isn't a bad dream. I can't see. I've had 2 small strokes, so my balance is shot to pieces. So I'll walk into a door frame. I'll stub my toe. There'll be blood going over the carpet. My wife gets cross with me. Does that almost sound like it's happened? Because it has. And that's the point at which that old Winston Churchill cry, when we face adversity, we've got a choice. We either give up or we get up. And actually, often it's the lookout that I find the most compelling thing to getting up. Right, I'm going to send somebody a WhatsApp message. I'm going to send somebody a text. I'm going to empty the dishwasher. I'm going to buy my children a lollipop and put it under their pillow. And do that for someone else. And often it breaks that vortex of introspective sort of despair. And I think that is something that ravages just too many people. That sometimes just to say, come on, no, look out. Think about someone else.
So up,
forward, and out. Yeah.
And I guess,
that's right.
And the opposite is?
The opposite, well, is not a good place to be, but that is to look down, is to look back, and it's to look in. And I sometimes build that to be a dangerously bleak individual.
A DBI, okay.
And again, you can so often, I chastise myself quite heavily now, and often it is because I'm doing one of those DB or I. It's like, stop doing that. I sometimes take myself off for walks, and we've now got a dog, It's not a guide dog, but it's a slightly hazardous moment, me taking it for a walk, really. So I fill my pocket with treats, and that usually does the job. And I went for a walk with him a little over a year ago. And we were walking down this pathway, which isn't a bridle way, but I walked head first into a horse. I don't know whether any of you guys have ever done that, but it's it's a very elite club, which you're welcome to come and join me in. But as I walked into this horse, I fell to the ground, and if I'm really honest with you, I was a bit embarrassed. I thought, oh gosh, she's not going to think I'm a right old fool. So I got up, and I sort of was dusting myself down, pretending all was okay, and she said, did you not see us? And I said, I didn't really know. She said, oh, can you not see? And I said, no, I can't really. At which point she said, have you always not been able to see? And I said, no. I had this brain tumor, I think at that time, it was 3.5 years ago. And she said to me, she said, oh gosh, so that's when you lost your sight. She said, so how do you get through? I said, well, I try to look up. I try to look forward, and I try to look out. And I'm quite hard on myself. I chastise myself if I'm failing to do that, because we are our own chief executives. We are the ones that have got to make the choice. And she then looked at me, and you could almost hear the cogs in her brain whirring. And she said, looking up, forward and out, she said, doesn't the Bible say something about that? Isn't that faith, hope, and love? And I say to you all this evening, and on this note I'm going to finish, I'm just going to say, do you know what, folks? If you take that route, I think we really can get through. God is with us.
That's fantastic, James. Can I keep you just for a little bit? Are you okay to go for 2 more questions?
Yes,
is that all right?
course,
Yeah? Because you've had to learn a different mode of being now. You've had to learn how to deal with weakness. And you were talking to me today about having fajitas, for instance.
Yeah.
And what a dangerous thing it was, because I wasn't really thinking, like, why are fajitas dangerous? And then I was thinking, but imagine doing it blindfolded. Yeah. Imagine not being able to see and wrapping up the tortilla and putting it in. And your whole life is filled with vulnerability. In a way that we're used to being independent, we're used to being strong, we're used to bounding out into the world. What's it like to feel like you could run into a horse? Or,
Well, I think the word is, it's humbling. And at times it can be incredibly humiliating. And, it can sometimes, 95% of the time it's fine, and you learn to live, I suppose, in a very humbled state. And I really claim and take ownership of that verse in Galatians 2, chapter 20, where Paul talks about, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And I sometimes feel like the shell of James Shone that was a games player, a golfer, a cricketer, all those things, that doesn't matter anymore. It's gone. And actually, it's what comes out of me. It's who I am, not necessarily what I do that counts.
Yeah, that's great. So just finally, if people were here and they wanted to investigate Christian faith, if they weren't necessarily, they didn't believe in the same God that you did, but they wanted to figure out whether UFO works, where they wanted to figure out who they should look up to, what kind of advice would you give to someone investigating Christian faith?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I think it's I always say to people, it's not about starting at the very beginning, trying to work out, where or how or who created. I think even the greatest scientists on earth can't quite fathom that one out. But I think we go forward a bit and we ask ourselves the question, who is Jesus? Is he mad? Is he bad? Is he the Son of God? He's making some pretty outlandish claims. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the Son. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. All those sort of claims. And it's asking yourself, can I really believe in those claims? Doing a bit of research and then diving in. I honestly would not be sitting here. My head would be under a pillow. In fact, I would think I would have called it a day without that sense of purpose that the life of Jesus has given me.
So just dive in.
Just dive in.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, James Schoen. Brilliant. Did you pick up one of these when you came in? Perhaps it was on your seat when you came in. If you didn't spot it, you're probably sitting on it right now. But this is John's Gospel. This is one of the biographies of Jesus that kicks off the New Testament. You might know there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these biographies of the life of Jesus. This is the fourth one, called John, written by a great companion of Jesus, called John. And he really kicks off his gospel. We looked at this yesterday, if you were with us at Hamilton Road Presbyterian, and we saw how John's gospel begins by saying, "In the beginning was the Word." And that's the title for Jesus. Jesus is the Word of God. That means he's the explanation of God. He's everything God wants to say to us. If you want to know what God's like, have a look at Jesus. And we saw yesterday that if you read through John's gospel, you get this extraordinary picture of the most fascinating man who's ever lived. Here is this Jesus who, if you were here yesterday, you saw that he goes to the party and he brings wine. And then he goes to a temple and he brings a whip. Interesting guy, don't you think? Goes to the party and he brings wine. Goes to a temple and he brings a whip because he can't stand the hypocrisy of the money changers, and he turns over the money changers' tables, and he speaks truth to power, and then he unleashes grace on the least and the last and the lost. He's this extraordinary figure. I don't know if you've spent any time since you've become an adult. Have you spent any time since you've become an adult actually reading these first-hand biographies of Jesus? He's incredible. And I remember when I was aged about 21, picking up Luke's gospel, it happened to be, and just reading through, and halfway through, I just saw the towering majesty of Jesus. I saw his stooping love. And I thought, what an incredible human being. I think he's tops. I think he's it. I think he's numero uno, head honcho, number one. He must be Lord. I didn't really know to use that word, Lord. I've since learnt that that's the word you call him. But at that stage, I was just looking at Jesus and thinking, you're tops. You're ultimate. You've got to be it. And according to the Bible, that's kind of how you become a Christian. You look at Jesus and you recognize that he is what God is like. And I wonder if you've ever come to that conviction yourself. You look at Jesus and you think, oh, I don't know what God's like, but if he's not like this, he ought to be, right? And as you start to have those sorts of thoughts about Jesus, you look at him and you start to call him Lord, look out, you're becoming a Christian, right? Creeps up on you like that. And so I want to do something dangerous with you. Shall we open up this book and do the most dangerous thing imaginable, and we'll see if Jesus might be the God that everyone else just talks about. Everyone's got some kind of idea of what God's like. If you come to the conclusion that Jesus is what God's like, then bad luck, you're a Christian. It just kind of happens like that. Should we have a look at page 50? And as we look to him, this is part of looking up that James was talking about. If you want to live this outgoing life of looking up, looking forwards, looking out, first thing you've got to do, says James, if you want to get through, if life throws you a curveball, what have you got to do? You've got to look up and you've got to figure out, who is God? What is he like? What is ultimate reality? On page 50, I just want to draw your attention to one sentence. It's two-thirds of the way down the page, number 24, verse number 24. Do you see this? Jesus is praying. It's the night before he dies, and we're listening in on a prayer between Jesus and somebody that he calls Father. Verse 24, Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you've given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Earlier, James said, when you look at Jesus and you look at the claims that he made, you can only really come to three different conclusions about him. And James was drawing on the wisdom of C.S. Lewis, one of your own. You're a man, C.S. Lewis. You love that guy, right? We all love C.S. Lewis. He wrote the Narnia books, and in his great book called Mere Christianity, he makes this argument about who Jesus is. And he says, when you look at the things that Jesus says, you can only make three conclusions about who Jesus is. Either this guy is mad. And you can understand why you would make that kind of claim, wouldn't you? Father, I want those you've given me to be with me where I am, to see my glory, the glory you've given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Who does he think he is? You see that he thinks he is older than the universe, don't you, in this verse? Jesus actually thinks of himself as older than the cosmos. And apparently he's in this unique relationship with the Most High, Emperor of the universe, and he calls him Dad. Who does he think he is? And he says that from before the world began, he's been in this relationship in which God the Father has been pouring out love and blessing onto him for eternity past. That's who he thinks he is. You know, it's my job to go around and I talk to people about who Jesus is, and very often I get the annoying opinion that people sometimes have. They say, I love Jesus, he was such a good teacher. And let me tell you why that's annoying, because if you think that Jesus is just a good teacher, that only goes to show that you are not a good listener, okay? Because what is Jesus teaching? What does he say about himself? He says that he's older than the universe. He says that he is in this unique relationship. He is the Son of the Father. He says he's been loved from eternity past, being filled with the Holy Spirit from before the world began. That's who Jesus thinks he is. Now, if I introduced myself to you this evening and I said, hello, my name's Glenn Scrivener, I'm the unique and eternal Son of God. I'm older than the universe, I made all of you. I'm the one path to life and love and liberty. What would you do? You'd call 999. You'd try to get me sectioned, wouldn't you? Of course you would. Have you ever met anyone who's claimed to be the Son of God? I've actually met a couple of people who've claimed to be the Son of God. Very seriously, they seriously thought that they were the Son of God. And you won't be surprised to learn that I met them on the mental health wing of a hospital. And one of them has actually become a good friend of mine called Mark, and he was having a psychotic episode at the time. He was not in a good place. And one of the things that he was saying is that he was the Son of God. And he made this claim quite loudly and quite boldly to everybody on the wing. And he came a cropper, though, because he told somebody else on the wing, and they said, oh, brilliant, I've been meaning to meet you for so long. I'm so glad that we've got the Son of God here with us. He was being completely genuine. He said, I've got this real question about a verse in the Bible. Can you help me with Revelation chapter 11? I want to figure out who the two witnesses are. And he started this very in-depth question about a book of the Bible. And my friend Mark had to admit, actually, I've never read the Bible. And this other guy was appalled. He said, you're the Son of God, and you've never read the Bible. You should read the Bible. And my friend Mark said, you know, you're right. I probably should read the Bible. It's probably about time that the Son of God read the Bible. And so he went back to his room, and there was a Gideon's Bible, and he started opening up, and he started at the New Testament. He started reading through it. He said, I made the two most beautiful conclusions that you can ever make in the world. Number one, Jesus is the Son of God. Number two, I'm not. Can you imagine just the burdens falling off your shoulders? I'm not the Son of God. Jesus is. But when somebody says, I am the unique and eternal Son of God, I was there from before the world began, there's always been a Niagara Falls of blessing and love cascading onto my head from the Father by the Spirit, that's who I am. When people make those sorts of claims, we generally section them, okay? They're not in a good place when they make those claims. What about Jesus? Do you want to section him? Do you want to section him? I don't think I want to section him. I mean, his teaching has built civilizations. It has forged the world that we live in. It has transformed billions of lives. I don't think I want to section him. Do you? Do you want to section him? That's one option, says C.S. Lewis. Maybe you section him. So maybe he's a madman, says C.S. Lewis. Or, as James was reminding us, if he's not mad, maybe he's bad. Maybe he's not lying to himself. Maybe he knows full well he's not the Son of God. He's just lying to you. Right? That would make him a bad man, wouldn't it? And maybe for nefarious purposes, he's trying to pass himself off as the eternal Son of God. Maybe he just wants your credit card details or something, I don't know. And at that stage, you've got to ask yourself the question, is Jesus a bad man? Am I prepared to say that about Jesus? I don't think anyone here is prepared to call Jesus a bad man, are you? Here is literally love incarnate. He just is love covered over with flesh. That's who Jesus is. You read through this book and you just see him giving himself away. At the end of this book, spoiler alert, with arms wide open, he bleeds for his own enemies, praying, "Father, forgive." I don't think he's a bad man. But C.S. Lewis said, look, if he's not a madman lying to himself, and if he's not a bad man lying to you, well, then he must be telling the truth, mustn't he? He's not lying to himself. He's not lying to you. The only option left is he's telling the truth. He is the unique and eternal Son of God. Do you see a fourth option? I don't see a fourth option. If you've got a fourth option, come and tell me afterwards. Love to hear it. But I don't see a fourth option. And C.S. Lewis said that there is no fourth option. It's a trilemma. You've heard of dilemmas. This is a trilemma. 3 options. 1, 2, or 3. Which are you? And at this stage, I'm not trying to put your arm up behind your back until you say, all right, fine, Jesus is God, fine. You know, I happen to think it would be quite good news if Jesus is what God is like. Don't you think that would be good news? I happen to think it would be the most extraordinary news in the world if God is actually entirely like Jesus. If Jesus is this Son of the Father, this chip off the old block. If Jesus is what God is like, that's the best news in the world, don't you think? If Jesus is what God is like, I'm in. What about you? So who does Jesus think he is? He thinks he's the unique and eternal Son of God. Who does he think God is? He thinks God is Father. A Father who has always been loving him. A Father who has always been pouring out love and light and life onto him in the joy of the Holy Spirit. That's Jesus' picture of ultimate reality. That's Jesus' picture of God. So when James says we need to look up, what are we going to look up to? How do you think this world ticks? What do you think ultimate reality is? Do you think this world just grinds along according to iron laws of physics? Is that it? Is it just that, all the thoughts that you're having, that's just psychology that boils down to biology, and biology just boils down to chemistry, and chemistry just boils down to physics, and we're all just quarks and leptons fizzing? Is that ultimate reality? Really? We're matter in motion? Jesus says, Father, you loved me from before the foundation of the world. According to Jesus, we've come from love, we've been shaped by love, we are intended for love. Who do you believe? What's your picture of ultimate reality? As you look up to the heavens and you try and figure out what is ultimate about life, do we just grind along according to iron laws of physics? Or is Jesus telling the truth? Maybe before, behind, beneath, beyond this world, there is love. What do you think? When you look up, what do you see? Come to Jesus and you see love. That might just get you through, mightn't it? When life throws you a curveball. Maybe if love shows up and says, listen, I was there before the world began, I'll be there when it wraps up, love wins. If that person shows up, and if you could trust that person, that might just get you through, mightn't it? When the doctor says, I'm afraid it's bad news, you're a very poorly man, you're a very poorly woman, that might just get you through when you look up and you see Jesus. But then James said, you don't just look up, you also look forward. Because we need to have hope, don't we, in this world? And this world is in short supply of hope, don't you think? All the goals that this world will sell to you are so short-term, aren't they? When underneath, we have a hopeless future, according to this world. According to this world, you and I, we are just biological survival machines, aren't we? We are just wet robots. That's all we are. DNA replicating machines. Biological survival machines clinging to an insignificant rock, hurtling through a meaningless universe towards eternal extinction. But Starbucks has a new flavored latte, so that's quite good, isn't it? We're going to Spain in the summer, so that's nice, We're renovating the kitchen, so that's good. Is that your hope? All the while, we are biological survival machines clinging to an insignificant rock, hurtling through a meaningless universe towards eternal extinction. Is that any kind of hope? Jesus here says, there is a Father who has always loved him, a Father who will be in charge of the future. And Jesus here, he's just about to go to the cross. He's just about to pioneer a way through death and out the other side. That would give you hope, wouldn't it? If you found out that there was an answer to the one problem that we all face. James had to face that scary moment with the consultant aged 39. I don't know when you're going to have your scary moment. Some of you have had some very scary moments with consultants. But if you're lucky, that moment will happen to you. You're unlucky if you don't get that moment. If you're lucky, you get that moment with the consultant who says, you're a very poorly man, you're a very poorly woman. Are your affairs in order? Is there hope on the far side of that? I remember last time that James and I met, we spoke about that moment when he went into that first round of surgery, 14 hours in surgery, and would he wake up or would he not? What do you cling to in that moment? What do you say to your wife in that moment when you're not sure you'll wake up on the far side? Do you have a hope that can sustain you through that? If you don't have a hope that can sustain you through that, you don't have hope. Because that moment's coming to us all. So do we have a hope in the face of death? Jesus, here in John's Gospel, he is about to pioneer a path through death and out the other side. He's like the needle that sort of pierces the black shroud of death and comes out the other side. You'll see in John's Gospel the way that he appears after death. The tomb is empty, and Jesus has passed through death. He's punched a hole through death, and he's come out the other side, and he kind of shows us what his kind of future is. It's a beautiful future in John's Gospel. If you could spend an hour or two reading this, you get to this happily ever after where Jesus comes through death, and on the other side we see the future. And what is Jesus' future? Well, he goes for long country walks with friends. He goes fishing with his mates. There's barbecues on the beach. Sounds like Australia, doesn't it? That's the life, isn't it? Long country walks with friends, fishing with mates, barbecues on the beach, tear-filled reunions, talking late into the night about the stuff that really matters. That's life, isn't it? That's eternal life with Jesus. If we cling to him like threads to the needle, we get pulled through that same trajectory, through the valley of the shadow, but out the other side, into feasting joy, into hope. Could you possibly believe in hope? Let me give you 3 reasons why you can believe in hope. 3 reasons why you can believe that Jesus holds the key to the future and that there will be a happily ever after. First reason is the history of the cosmos. The history of the cosmos is a triumph of life over death. It really is. Your existence here is a triumph of life over death. Do you know the odds against it? So extraordinary. The miracle of you being here. I mean, first of all, everything had to come from nothing. That's quite a miracle, isn't it? That's quite a triumph of life over death. Everything coming from nothing. You know, as a Christian, I happen to believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, but this is far more extraordinary than that as miracles go. This is the virgin birth of the cosmos. And without a virgin, it's quite extraordinary. If you don't believe in God, you've got to believe in something so extraordinary that everything came from nothing. But we live in that kind of universe in which life triumphs over death, in which order triumphs over chaos, in which life triumphs over non-life. And here we all are. The history of the cosmos tells you that life triumphs over death. But if you don't believe in a God of resurrection, a God of life over the dead, then I don't know how you understand your own existence. I think everything in the universe is pointing to a God of life over dead, a God who will give you a future. And then there's not only the history of the world, there's also the history of Jesus. The history of Jesus gives you the confidence that life triumphs over death. Here's the history of Jesus that everybody, basically everybody can agree to. Whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, a Jew, a Christian, whatever your beliefs about things, all the historians can agree that this figure called Jesus had an extraordinary ministry. He was wildly popular at times, wildly unpopular at other times. He caused a disturbance in the temple area in Jerusalem in around the year 30 AD. He was arrested, he was tried by the Jewish authorities and the Roman authorities. He was sentenced to death under a capital charge. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He was dead. He was put into a grave, into a tomb. And 3 days later, that tomb was empty. The whereabouts of that tomb was obvious to everybody. 3 days later, that tomb was empty. The body was never found. And Jesus' followers had experiences of Jesus living, feasting, speaking with them face to face. These experiences of the risen Jesus kept going for 40 days until they said he went back to heaven. Those are the facts. Everybody agrees to the facts. And actually, when you go through all the different permutations of what might have happened to Jesus, the most obvious thing is what the Bible insists, that Jesus did indeed punch a hole through death and come out the other side. To disbelieve that story is to embroil yourself in all sorts of absurdities. To imagine that somehow Jesus just swooned on the cross and roused himself in the cool of the tomb and somehow moved a stinking great boulder out of the way and overpowered the guards and in a semi-crucified state appeared to his disciples and gave them great hope in life over the dead. It doesn't really work. But the very history of Jesus tells you that actually Jesus is the God who's come down, punched a hole through death and come out the other side. The history of the cosmos tells you that there's hope, that there's life over death. The history of Jesus tells you that there's hope, there's life over death. And the history of the church tells you that there's hope, there's life over death. Since Easter Sunday, there's been an expanding universe called the church. It's been the largest sociological phenomenon the world has ever seen. Today, there's 2 billion people who call themselves Christians, and the church is always growing. It's bigger today than it was yesterday, and tomorrow it'll break that record, and the next day it'll break that record, and the next day it'll break that record. There's this expanding universe called the church. But if you wind back the clock to time zero, when you wind back the clock to the time when it all began, where do you find yourself? You find yourself at an empty tomb in Jerusalem. Something happened. Something was unleashed. A power of life over the dead that has turned this world upside down. How do you explain that? How do you explain that the most famous figure of human history was a penniless peasant who died under a capital charge aged 33, surrounded by no-hopers? How do you explain that he's the most famous man in the world unless he really is who he says he is? And if he really is who he says he is, then it would be extraordinary if he didn't rise from the dead, right? If he is the Son of the Father, then what if he actually came down to do something about that enemy called death? That's worth investigating, don't you think? So there's hope. There's real hope, isn't there? If Jesus rose from the dead, it means when the consultant says, have you got your affairs in order? You can say, you know what? Even if heaven and earth give way, I know someone who holds the future. He will get me through. He will get me through to feasting joy. Do you know that kind of hope? If not, you're not going to be able to cope when life throws you the curveball. So we look up, we look forward, and James said we look out to others in that life of love, faith, hope, and love. Love is all through this verse, isn't it? Father, you loved me from before the creation of the world. Jesus' great desire is he's been in on this love relationship with his Father from before the world began. And he comes to the world and he says, come in, join me. I'm in this Niagara Falls of love and blessing. Come and enjoy my Father as your Father. Be filled with my spirits. May he become your spirit. And then as you receive that love, flow out to the world. Look out to the world. Give yourself away. Lose yourself in order to find yourself. Jesus is always saying that kind of thing. In order to find yourself in the world, lose yourself. Give yourself away. And we know that this works in all sorts of areas, don't we? The musician who's lost in her music and yet never more truly herself. Or the soldier who gives himself for his comrades, but never is he more himself. The mother who gives herself in sacrificial service for her family, but never is she more herself. Why is it that we find ourselves by giving ourselves away? Well, apparently that's what God's life is like. God's life is about self-giving love, giving yourself away. And as you come to this God, the Jesus God, as you receive from him, you receive his love, you pour it out, and you are never more truly yourself. looking up, looking forwards, looking out. Or what's the alternative? Down, back, and in. What is it? A dangerously bleak individual. DBI, down, back, and in. A dangerously bleak individual. How are we going to live? How are we going to live? I think James has shown the way, don't you? We look up to a Father pouring out love to us in Jesus. We look forward to a future that's been pioneered by the Son of God. And we look out to a life of self-giving love. Is that the kind of life that you want to lead? If it is, I just invite you to say a short prayer. It's a short prayer where you repent and believe. That's the biblical phrase. You repent of the down, back, and in kind of life, and you say, no, that's not the answer. And instead you believe, you open yourself out to the up, forward, and out kind of life. Is that something you're ready to do? Just to say, God, I don't want to live that life anymore, down, back, and in. I want to live up, forward, and out. If that's something you want to do, I just want to offer some words that you might pray to God now. The words aren't magic, but they just might be one way that you can start this life of up, forward, and out. So should we just bow our heads and let me lead you in a prayer. And this might be appropriate for a few people here who want to live with hope in this world and with faith and with love. Our Father, thank you that you are a Father of love. Thank you for Jesus, who shows us what you're like. Father, I'm sorry for looking down and back and in. I thank you for Jesus. Thank you that he died on the cross. Thank you that he took on himself all the darkness of living down and back and in. Thank you that he died for my sins. And thank you that he rose again to give me new life. Father, I want to live his life from now on, looking up to you, looking forwards to genuine hope, and looking out to serve others. Fill me with your Spirit and help me to walk with Jesus through this uncertain world and into your sure hope. In Jesus' name, amen.